hopefully everyone can see this. Um, for those that have not been on a call where I've been on and where my name is mentioned, my name is Eric Roth, and I do what I've been now calling shamanic alchemical astrology. I do kind of look at other things that isn't just limited necessarily in that way. I do look at other systems and stuff. If it's something that feels like I can incorporate it into what I do, I do bring that in. And there's a lot of credible astrologers out there, and so there's always more to learn as we uncover more material. So this is first day of 2025. Excited to happy 2025, new year to everyone out there live on the call or listening or watching this afterwards. And 2025 is absolutely one of the most like potent years I've certainly have come across since I've been an astrologer over the last 15 years. And 2020 was a absolutely powerful year astrologically, due to the three-way conjunction of Saturn, Jupiter, and Pluto, not to mention the other alignments. But we're coming into this year, 2024 into 2025, as like it's like, think of that 2020 as just was the sort of the opening bell of like not just the Saturn Jupiter period, but other things that are coming across here for this 20-year plus period that we're in. And so I'm gonna talk about all the different layers, the major themes. Obviously, I can't get into every little thing that is going on in 2025. As I was talking with Deborah earlier about how we talked about how Chris Brennan has his very marathon level astrological discussions and descriptions for the annual things and other alignments that he gets into. We talk about the houses and the signs and so forth. So there is a lot happening here, and I could go on and on about this. But this is going to be a lot of fun to go into. So let's kind of do a little bit of a rundown here of what I'm going to talk about this in this annual episode. I did a previous recording that was a little bit of a shortened version of this. And so these are the main things that are taking place, the themes. Obviously, Mercury retrogrades and eclipse seasons happen every year. So I'll be briefly talking about that, and then looking at all these different outer planets changing signs, the lunar nodes changing signs, ingressing into Pisces and Virgo, along with the Mars and Venus cycles, and particularly I'm not going to talk too much about Mars other than to say Mars is going to be retrograde through Leo and Cancer until February 23rd of 2025. So there's that. It's like a whole other topic here. But Venus will also be retrograde this year for a month and a half. And there's some really special alignments taking place in March and April, and then into the summer and part of the fall as well. So lots of things to discuss there. So here's a little bit extra of the summary. So for Venus and Mars, this is the first time that Venus will have its morning star rise in the sign of Pisces since 1870. And that happens on March 29th, on the day of one of the eclipses. And then Mars will have its opposition with the sun on January 15th. I think it's 15th here at the West Coast. I think it's 16th, might be on the East Coast, or no, wait, 16th in Europe. But it's going to take place in the late degrees of Cancer. And so Mars has its own sort of synodic cycle that also begins at the opposition. So again, those are like separate topics I don't want to talk too much about. I want to put a lot more focus in on what the outer planets are doing in this discussion here. Uranus moves into Gemini for the first time since 1941 through 1949. And we were in the middle of World War II and the start of the Cold War with the Soviet Union. Some powerful eclipse seasons coming up here. There's also two Chiron Eris conjunctions in March and October. And then also Saturn Neptune conjunction period, which depending on how one looks at that, Richard Tarnas uses a wider orb for especially for outer planets. So we could look at 2024 to 2026 as the conjunction period because they got within 15 degrees in 2024. But the core of it's going to be in from June through I believe it's August, and then again in the winter time of 2026. So this is the first time that Saturn and Neptune come into conjunction since 1989, and that happened in Capricorn. And Saturn is coming into Aries for the first time since 96 to 99. And Neptune, the first time in Aries since 1861 to 75. The lunar nodes, as I mentioned before, they're transiting into Pisces and Virgo for the first time. And this is since 06 to 07. And then Jupiter moves into Cancer for the first time since 2013 to 2014. So first, we're going to talk about the lunar nodes and ingressing into the signs of Pisces and Virgo. So it's the North Node moving into Pisces and the South Node moving into Virgo. And this is directly impacting where the eclipses are going to be taking place, the eclipses in March and September. So just to run down this, the North Node in Pisces helps to co-create conditions for future advancement in interconnectedness spiritually through dreams, physical and technological manifestations of nonlinear realities, as well as checking in with our feelings and compassion and empathy. And Deborah, you're the one who turned me on to astrologer S.J. Anderson. And one of his videos, he talks about the lunar nodes. And I think he was bringing in Saturn there too, because Saturn was in, I think also in Pisces at that time, but there was that connection in there. And he thinks that there's going to be some significant developments in the technological realm with the North Node moving into Pisces, particularly in sort of this like the ethereal realm, which has a lot to do with like cell phones and the sort of the ether that we continue to build up technologically and communicate with these invisible waves, these invisible rays you can't see. You have to, use machines to detect them. So it's Pisces as a sign, definitely connected into sort of that celestial realm where, it's sort of very intangible place. And then we've got the South Node, which has to do with what we're letting go of, what we're depositing, what we're pushing out, what we're detoxifying from. And so this in Virgo is a chance to let go of outmoded and toxic patterns in our collective and individual lives. And it can help us recognize the sacred within and purging out what no longer is supportive of our sovereign selves. So these, as I mentioned before, are going to be directly impactful with the eclipse seasons. And so when I get to the eclipses, which are coming up pretty quickly here, we'll get to really get into that. Particularly, it doesn't mean that the eclipses are only going to take place in Pisces and Virgo, because an eclipse can happen within about a 15 to 16 degree range of the node, whether it's a new moon or full moon. So just something to keep in mind, because I think it's two of the eclipses are still in the Aries Libra polarity, and then two of them are in the Pisces Virgo polarity, as you'll see here coming up. So one of the major things that's happening for 2025 is this Chiron Eris conjunction period. There's three of them, two in 2025 and a third in 2026. And Chiron represents the wounded healer and the teacher. It represents where we can work, where we can do our inner work on, where are our vulnerabilities, where are the things that we really need to develop within ourselves and heal up, and heal or heal thyself, but also show up on the collective, like not just on a personal level, but on a collective level. Both of these planetary bodies, Chiron and Eris, are in Aries. And Aries, especially in the March and April period, that sign is, along with Pisces, is really, really important. And so it just so happens that Chiron and Eris are also sort of part of the larger framework of this expression in Pisces and Aries, and particularly in this case, Aries. So this conjunction period for that lasts for just under a year. May 26, 2025 is the first one. October 8th, 2025 is the second, and then March 19, 2026. So this conjunction period may bring a little bit more volatility to the world. The intent, I feel, of this is to bring attention to issues surrounding war, activism, speaking from instinct, equal rights, and healing from injustice, and also the real world truth. So as I talked about Chiron, Eris has this stronger sort of activist type of energy. It's about the sort of the utilizing the will and the intelligence, and it's kind of a deeper level of courage that can come through, and especially around the feminine that can come out there. There's a great astrologer, Henry Seltzer, wrote a book about Eris, and it's called The 10th Planet. So if you want to know more about that, that book is fully recommended, and he gives numerous examples of a great of natal charts, and where Eris factors in heavily, and particularly in that kind of energy, activism, and speaking the truth, especially during like the suffrage movement in the world during the 19th and 20th century for women's rights, and ultimately for equal rights. So we could see that these two are going to be hanging around each other there in the 25 degree range of Aries. So it isn't just this big Saturn Neptune thing, and the Uranus and Gemini thing, and the eclipses, but we've got these two other the planets that are providing some additional insights to how 2025 can go. All right, well, let's get into the eclipses, Mercury retrograde, and Venus. So, and then talk a bit about March, because there's some really interesting connections here that are happening for March. I feel like if there is, I don't know if it's necessarily going to be the most powerful month in 2025, but I think it could be a candidate for that, for a lot of significant change, and in competition with what's coming up in sort of the late spring through the summer period of 2025. Okay, so first we're going to look at the Mercury retrogrades. There's three of them. So the main one that I want to highlight here is the very first one, March 14th through April 7th of 2025. It starts at 9:35 Aries, and runs back all the way to 26:49 Pisces. And then we have July 17 to August 11. That's all takes place in the sign of Leo, from 1534 Leo to 414 Leo. And then November 9th, 2025 through November 29th, 2025, 6:51 Sagittarius to Scorpio. And I imagine, Deborah, you've probably got all of that listed also in your PDF. So I'm excited to kind of review that tonight after the seminar, the webinar we're doing here. But this first one here, I think it's probably, of the three, probably going to be the more potent one. The sign of Aries, I'm going to talk about Venus here in a moment, but the sign of Aries wants to move. It wants to kind of get the energy flowing, and not sit still. It's kind of like a wildfire, a brush fire. It just wants to keep going, and it's kind of powered by those winds. And so with that energy really, really going, and with all of these different planets in the sign of Aries, and then backed up on the back end by the planets in the sign of Pisces transitioning into Aries, I feel like it's going to be a pretty powerful month. Now, Mercury retrogrades tend to have a common elemental theme to it. So 2024 was more of the fire theme, but we're transitioning from fire to water in 2025. So there's only one of these Mercury retrogrades that's fully in the sign of Leo, and that's the one in the summertime. But the other two end, and they station direct in a water sign. So that transitions, right there on the border for 2025. So if you look back at previous and future Mercury retrogrades, you'll find a lot of like a common thread through the elements. In some cases, it's like this where they're transitioning. It's not entirely water or entirely fire or one of the elements, but you've got that transition thing. So that would be, for anybody wanting to look at that more, you'll notice a lot of those and how that element contributes to the dialogue of and consciousness evolution of humanity, particularly around, in this case, Mercury representing the mind, communication, thought, perception, and all of that. Looks like okay. I'm just seeing you got thrown in a question there for others in case they want to ask. So yeah, I welcome even during this presentation, if you've got some questions, most of them that come up will definitely be able to answer at the end of the presentation. But if something specific that we can answer quickly, we can do it during this. So keeping this in mind here, this 935 Aries for Mercury retrograde, the very first one that we've got for 2025. All right, so Venus has a retrograde too, and it's for Venus, it starts a whole new synodic cycle on March 29th, which is the day of the of one of the eclipses, the partial solar eclipse. And that cycle begins in Pisces, but it's really close to Aries. But you can see here when Venus stations retrograde on March 1st of 2025, it stations at 1050. So that's only a little over a degree away from where Mercury 2 weeks later stations retrograde. And they both station direct in the sign of Pisces. So both of these planets, it's not often that this happens where you get both Venus and Mercury retrograde with a lot of overlap. In fact, the entire period that Mercury's retrograde, Venus will also be retrograde. So they'll be really traveling together for a few months. And so that's remarkable in and of itself. And they're contributing to this message during this late winter, early spring period for humanity. Obviously, on the southern hemisphere, it's the late summer, early fall period. The opposite. The seasons are opposite on that side. Now, I haven't really fleshed all of this out fully, but I really wanted a platform and I'm going to share also a chart. And if we need to bring up solar fire, I have that available. We're going to look at that as well. Or we can also look at the US chart too with all of this. So here's the sort of the rundown of this. Now, I mentioned as well that Eris and Chiron are also in Aries, but they're in the later degrees of Aries. So they're not really that close to here, but they're all also part of this Aries. So you can see March 1st, we have Venus stationing retrograde at 1050, Mercury stationing retrograde at 935 Aries. We have a partial solar eclipse, which I'm going to talk about the eclipses here in a moment, at 9 degrees Aries on March 29th. And then the following day, Neptune ingresses into the sign of Aries on March 30th. So we have all of these things happening in the sign of Aries. And I'm going to review all of the eclipse and show you all the dates on this, but I wanted to show you this one specific eclipse first on March 29th. So This is just taken from where the area that I live in. So wherever you are in the globe, it'll be in a different house, most likely. Depending on your city, locations, and state and country and all of that, time of day. But you can see here, we have even Ceres is in here in Pisces. We've got Saturn, the North Node, Venus, and Neptune all conjunct. But Mercury is only less than a degree away from Neptune at this time of the eclipse at 028 Aries. We have the 9-degree even Aries partial solar eclipse. And then we have Eris and Chiron here at 22 and 24 degrees respectively, or Chiron and Eris respectively. So we've got all of them lined up here. And what's interesting is this is something that's going to be a theme more in 2026 and 2027. As you're looking at this chart, you can see Pluto and Chiron, Uranus coming into an almost trine of Pluto. It doesn't have an exact trine in 2025, but in 2026 and 2027, it has multiple trines. And then Neptune will have sextiles to Pluto, a number of them in 2026 and 2027. So they don't quite get to that point. They get within about a degree or two in 2025. So it's kind of the early period of that. But Neptune's sort of in the center of all this between Uranus and Pluto. So you're seeing some really interesting situation cropping up here. And that's why it's another reason I think that these particularly the end of March and early April is a really powerful period for humanity. That something is wanting to come through here. And again, it could be in different houses. I've got it here. It shows in the third and fourth house, so it depends on your locale. Or if you're looking at it, how it relates to your personal chart, it's going to definitely show up there in some way. I've done a number of readings recently where, in fact, one in particular, within the last few days, a person had their natal north node at 9 degrees and like 3 or 4 minutes of Aries. And so I was looking at that, and I spent a lot of time talking about the in the interpretation of what that really means for them and how it impacts their destiny, their future, and how it can really, regardless of what other cycles are going on for them, it can really show up in a big way where it's really
Best friend's going outside.
it's really showing up in a big way
Bitch,
for
I ain't
helping
on her
them
yet. They
along
gonna drop,
their.
bitch. I ain't shaking ass. That's what the fuck they wanna see. They know I shakes this ass. Not you on her watching me. What's wrong with you? I ain't talking about shit. 9,000 views. I ain't talking about nothing. I'm some ass. Y'all wanna watch me break? How about not her views dropping? Not you watching, boo. Girl, I don't know when I got asthma. Oh, shit.
Sorry, everyone. We had a little bit of an interruption there. I was pausing, hoping that we could. There we go. I'm back. All right. Thank you, Deborah, for helping with that and taking care of that. So, coming back to the discussion about March and that how this really elegant alignment of planets is forming here. And with the March 29th being sort of at the center of this, and in large part because of the eclipse, but also we can even extend it to March 30th with Neptune moving into the sign of Aries, and then later that day conjuncting Mercury going retrograde. Saturn doesn't enter Aries until the end of May. And so but it's still, you can see this within, is that, 15 degrees of between Saturn and the solar eclipse here. So all of that sort of frames this whole area of the chart. And this is one of the more powerful reasons why March is one of the months that I'm looking to as like some potential shifts happening. And there's a lot of things happening in 2025, but this, March has been on my radar for quite a while now. And it's become even more and more so when I've looked at people's charts, kind of going over all the different alignments there and seeing what's happening. It could be something that could do. I might be just doing a particular specific video just about like this particular alignment here. So this is a lot of fun to really get into here between the Pisces and Aries. So if we're looking at like what is that archetypal expression there with Pisces and Aries? Well, when you have two signs together, they really don't have much of a common ground. However, in like when you're alchemizing the two signs together, it's where the common ground could be is in the sort of the quality of belief. Aries wants to believe in its mission and purpose. It wants to step forth and go and take charge and rally the troops, so to speak, and overcome the obstacles and solve the mission, solve the puzzle. Whereas Pisces believes because it wants to merge with the cosmos. It wants to merge with all that is there and be part of that energetic experience there. And so Pisces also wants to serve. So it can step in and serve Aries in a way that is, that is more heartfelt and compassionate and empathic. And with Saturn also there's a certain responsibility to do it in a healthy, responsible way, in a way that actually builds something. So there could be something really, really constructive, but also kind of ethereal that emerges out of this whole, combination of Aries and Pisces. So it remains to be seen what will actually take place. And it's definitely worth further exploration. I don't want to spend the whole webinar talking about this, but it really captured my attention. So it's like one of the major bullet points of 2025. So the eclipses, there's two eclipse seasons. There are one in March and one in September. And some years are dominated by the solar eclipses and other years by the lunar eclipses. In this year, there are total lunar eclipses, but no total solar eclipses. So you have these partial solar eclipses that are taking place. They still have an impact astrologically, of course, but there won't be quite as many people that will be able to see put a lot of emphasis on that. So the first one is March 13th, 2025. This one will be visible here in the Americas. So if you're in Canada, the US and Mexico, and it even, because half the planet is covered in darkness at that time, we've got Africa and Europe also able to see at least parts of the total lunar eclipse. That takes place at 2356 Virgo, so it's a south node eclipse. So it has to do a lot with letting go of things. And, where have you been of service in the world? And are you putting too much energy into it? Have you bared too much weight and responsibility in being of service? And then also as a reminder for each and every one of us, what is this diagram here with the chart? You can see how far away the eclipse is. It's at 9 degrees, but the node is looks like it's 12 degrees away. So the farther away it is from the eclipse, the node is, the less of a chance you have for a total eclipse or an annular eclipse. So in this case, it's just partial. But you can get eclipses up to roughly 16-ish degrees away at its most extreme, but that would just be such a barely noticed, whether it be lunar or solar eclipse, but it would still count as an eclipse. But again, the closer it is, the more the more strongly felt and visible the eclipse would be. Okay, so the September eclipses, there is a total lunar eclipse at 1522 Pisces on September 7th, 2025. This one's uh, visible in the eastern part of the globe, basically Asia, Africa, parts of Europe, Australia, New Zealand, the South Pacific Ocean, and part of Antarctica gets to experience this. So like that first one there in on March 13th, 2025, the Americas get to see the, including South America, get to see the total lunar eclipse. But 6 months later, it's the other side of the globe that gets to see it. And then we have September 21st, 2025, a partial solar eclipse. So two partial solar eclipses and two lunar solar eclipses. This last eclipse of 2025 is at 2905 Virgo with Jupiter. Jupiter is like opposite. Let's see, wait. Hang on a second. That actually it could be because Jupiter's not. Oh, I think it's it might have to do with the square. No, I don't know why that's there. Okay, that might be an error. So let me take that off there. So that's just the partial solar eclipse at 2905 Virgo. That's right close to that 0 degree mark of Aries. And for those that don't have much of a understanding of the cardinal points in the zodiac, 0 Aries is the vernal equinox or spring equinox or March equinox point, where the sun enters the sign of Aries around the 20th, 21st of March. And that's when it happens. So that eclipse, that partial solar eclipse, is right within a degree of that moment on the autumnal side. So the opposite side of where the sun enters Aries. So in this case, it'd be where the sun is entering just one day before it enters the sign of Libra. So we get that connection to the cardinal points, sort of the hinges of the 4 directions of the world, from a metaphysical perspective. So we're connecting into that energy more strongly with Virgo. Again, how can we be of service in the world? How can we show up in our communities? How can we understand what is sacred in our lives? And again, maybe even build something anew at that point at this solar eclipse time, being it's a new moon, but an eclipse new moon. Okay, so let's go back and not go back, but go forward here and look at some of the other themes for 2025, some of the bigger ones here. So planets changing signs. So we have 4 outer planets changing signs in 2025. We had Pluto finally moving into Aquarius for the final time on November 19th, 2024. And so we have these 4 planets, starting with Neptune in Aries on March 30th. And it will be, for the most part, in Aries, which includes some of the transition years at the beginning of its transition, 2025, also to the end in 2038 to 39. So Neptune will be in Aries for quite a long time. Usually it's around 13 to 14 years that it's in a sign. And then we look at Saturn moving into Aries on May 24th, 2025. And it will be there for off and on. I mean, it spends a total of about 2.5 years per sign. But when you're dealing also with the transition years, it can look like it's about 3 years that it's with a lot of overlap into a new sign, all the way until early 2028 there. And then Jupiter moves into Cancer, then just a couple weeks later on June 9th, 2025, all the way till June 30th, 2026. So it's solidly in Cancer the whole time from June to June. And then Uranus moves into Gemini the following month on July 7th, 2025. And it will stay in Gemini for 4 months, and then it will back into Taurus for like 4 or 5 months before it moves back into Gemini, where it'll stay in Gemini until 2032, or it transitions into Cancer, and then finally it does its last retrograde loop through Gemini in 2033. So that's going to be one of the big topics we're going to talk about today as well. All right. So first off, I wanted to kind of put some attention on like all of these outer planets shifting here, um, from uh, starting with Pluto and Aquarius in November through Uranus and Gemini in July. So this is, I went back, and this definitely requires more research. I had a interesting conversation with another astrologer down in Mount Shasta this past weekend, and he and I and there was a couple other people in the room that were talking about uh, all these outer planets shifting in a short period of time. And when you can get that, you can really kind of shift the course of humanity. Like things go through some major shifts. Even if one is really ensconced in some paradigm or reality or society, there's something will start to open up into new territory. And the last time that this happened in such a short period of time was back in 1955 to 56. And that would include, like, without including Chiron, it would be just a 14-month period. But so this one here in the 2024 2025, this is an 8-month period, so a lot shorter, a lot more condensed. If we added Chiron to the mix, Chiron moving into the sign of Taurus in 2026, that would be a 19-month period where all of these outer planets are changing signs. Similar to 1955 to 56, when if we include Chiron in there, also throwing in about 20 months there. So you get less than 2 years, or just a little over a year and a half, where all of these different planets are moving into new signs. But in this case, this shows how rare it is. Again, I went back, 120 years. I'd have to go back, do a little bit more research about this, because this is probably just a project in and of its own when you're just looking at these major outer planets and what they're doing. So it's pretty rare. And during in fact, I'll have a little bit more, I got a little bit more to share about this. So in part two here, there's what this really means. And I look back at this and kind of sort of drawing in the knowledge from that time. It's kind of reflecting of a precipice that humanity is currently on right now, or a major intersection, we can call it, with regards to our technologies, our ideologies, religion, politics, social and wealth disparities, economic and ecological distresses that are happening, but also kind of a framework of ideas and new ideas and emergence of new gifts and things that are coming online, not just technologically, but how we are moving into a unknown quote future as humanity at large. What does that really look like? So having these outer planets shift, I think, will help us ultimately, but it can also stir up a lot of the sort of the chaotic forces at the same time. So, these ingresses don't by themselves only create the shift. We also participate in that. So they are like providing sort of the environment for us to kind of shift into a whole new territory for us. So what was happening in 1955, 56? Well, that was also a strong period of tumultuous events that were taking place. The U.S. was in its McCarthyism era at the kind of right at the height, just about to wane. Like, so we were kind of reaching that height of McCarthyism. Like, if you don't know what McCarthyism, it was a guy named McCarthy. I think it was a senator or a U.S. House rep that was basically leading one of the leaders of the charge of trying to track down all the communists in the United States, blacklisting people and all of that. So he got to that certain point where he was, basically, really, people were on edge at that time. We were in this Cold War with the Soviet Union, and the very first hydrogen bombs were starting to be developed and be tested at that time. So there's like that was like a world stage where a lot of people were fearful of what the future was going to really bring in for humanity. So we can see as far as like the fear, like the potential for shifting. Um, this was a decade before we saw the massive change of the counterculture and the revolutionary states of the 1960s across the world. So you kind of get an indication like that this played a kind of a role of our relationship, not only to government, but to, each other and other countries, our communities. What did it look like at that time? And like large scale paradigms also rising and falling during that time too. So what we're seeing now when looking at this, across the world with the wars, the political shifts and polarization in the US and other places, what we're seeing now is not necessarily going to be a permanent situation. There is going to be some shifting and changes happening. So and especially with our relationship to the physical planet of Earth and how we do life. We're seeing also the rise of, a greater energy toward even cryptocurrency. We're seeing new energy generation, new technological breakthroughs, but also, even on the opposite side of technology, a greater connection into connecting into each other in with communities and forging new groups. Like I talk about this when a lot of times when I'm talking to clients or I'm at holistic and psychic fairs on the West Coast, the US, is that there's a rise of more and more of these psychic and healing fairs. And I've never encountered so many since I've been an astrologer. So even before COVID hit in 2020, we didn't have that many. We had quite a number of them, and I thought there was a lot then, but now it's just like exploded, and in a way that I think is going to be ultimately very, very good for humanity because people are stepping in and they're this new golden age of potential knowledge with all this with all the information that's out there that can be utilized and hopefully in a healthy and wise way. And so what you're seeing out there is like there's anytime we see something like that might be like horrible or bad or terrible in the world that we might perceive as that, there's also the opposite that's happening too. And so I'm also seeing that in the world as well. All right, so let's take a look at this Saturn Neptune conjunction period here. This is, if I were to choose just one theme of all the themes that are happening in 2025, this would probably be my number one. There may be other astrologers that might not list it as the number one thing, but for me, I look at that because uh, you go back to previous incarnations of Saturn and Neptune, and I know Deborah, you and I did a little bit of exploration of that, and that we're going to do a lot more in a future the parallel timeline series that we're developing. So this is just a little bit of a preview to what we'll be doing a deep dive into in the coming months. All right, so um, Richard Tarnas, astrologer, in his book Cosmos and Psyche, he uses with the outer planets much wider orbs. So, not just like a 1 degree orb, but he looks at the 10 or 15 degrees of outer planet conjunctions or squares or oppositions. Even at times, I think I think there was part of his in the book, he talks about the sextile and trines as well. So there's particularly around like things like Uranus and Pluto or Neptune and Pluto, where you get those rare trines and sextiles. So all of these things like help humanity, quote, evolve. And evolve does not necessarily mean that we're making a lot of progress, we're getting better, everything's going to be improved. It just means we're moving through various stages. So back on May 29th and through July 28th of 2024, Saturn and Neptune were within about 11 degrees of each other. So in that, if we were to look at that as part of the definition of what Tarnas writes, that would be part of the early sort of indication of what Saturn and Neptune are trying to help bring into humanity. Now, they were doing this in the sign of Pisces. So their conjunction actually doesn't happen in Pisces. It happens in the at 0 degrees and I think 45 minutes of Aries in 2026. Saturn and Neptune get within a quarter of a degree of each other in the summer of 2025. So we're going to look at that as well. But during this sort of early period, this is some of what I'm sure some of you, when you look at what the status of the world is, and how at times chaotic it feels. That's, you're getting two worlds, Saturn, Neptune, that are quite different from each other. Neptune's all about the unreality. It has nothing to do with setting goals or making commitments or handling your financial situation or your family and all of that. Neptune's all about the dreaming the dream and kind of dissolving of reality and kind of getting lost in sort of the moment to moment thing where you're not necessarily having to focus in on really anything. You just allow the wind to take you where it takes you. And Saturn, on the other hand, wants to bring things into form. I saw a description earlier. I think there was a book about Saturn. I'll have to get it. Oh, Saturn. It's called Saturn Through the Ages. I've been reading this book, and he was talking about the connection between the celestial and this and the Saturn realm, where you can think of the universe out there, and then what Saturn does is it crystallizes it. It brings it into some kind of a form and function. It brings it into something tangible in our reality and brings kind of gravity to the situation. So it's like taking all those like intangible things out there that are maybe hidden in the sort of the invisible realm, in the dream realm, the spiritual realm, and trying to concretize all of that into something. And that's one of the ways that Saturn and Neptune interact. Another way is the opposite direction where Neptune kind of dissolves what no longer belongs or what has completed its purpose, where it might dissolve that crystallization and where it just floats away into the dust, into the invisible realm, and turns what was once there into just simply a memory, or what no longer belongs. So you can get the transmission of both from Saturn to Neptune and Neptune to Saturn as well at the same time. So we'll talk more about this as we go on. There's a pattern of Saturn and Neptune that Deborah and I are going to take a deep dive in, but I wanted to give you a little bit of a preview here. So the last time that these two planets were conjunct was 1989 in the sign of Capricorn. The last time they conjuncted in the sign of Aries was in 1703. So, but they have Saturn and Neptune conjunct each other every 35 and a half years. And they go through periods where they would go through the fixed signs, then the cardinal signs, then the mutable signs, and then back to the fixed signs again. So they actually go through all the different a series of those signs, of those modalities, and then before moving on to the next modality. So there's officially 9 separate tracks of Saturn and Neptune. And so we happen to be living right now in one of these tracks that is coming up, which is a different track from the one that happened in 1989. But it's also a connection. Doesn't mean that there's no connection between those tracks. It just means that you've got 9 different spokes on the wheel with Saturn and Neptune happening. So they complete their tracks every 320 years on a larger pattern. So something on a larger scale. I'm kind of opening this up to not just only the narrow look at 2025, but also as part of a larger theme here. Um, so this is the Saturn Neptune conjunction we're in right now here, at that will take place here in looking at July 12th, 2025, as when they get within about a fifth of a degree, a quarter of a degree. I think it's more like a quarter of a degree, but when July 12th is the closest that I see, when Saturn is at 156 Aries. I think that's about when it goes, roughly when it goes retrograde. And then Neptune's at 209 Aries. And so they don't actually conjunct at that time until February 20th, 2026. But if we look back at the pattern of this from the time 1989 all the way to 2025 to 2026, we can see there's an opening square or waxing square. There's the Saturn-Neptune opposition and the waning square. And each of those, kind of gives us some additional indications. Like 1989, I mean, that was truly one of the more powerful years of the 20th century. We saw a massive paradigm shift with the beginning of the Cold War ending. Eastern Europe was going through massive throes of moving from a autocratic communist type of environment into more democratic leaning type of states. And we had the Berlin Wall begin to fall at that time. The Soviet Union was not doing too well, and actually ended up officially collapsing in 1991 into a whole new type of state. And we had the Tiananmen Square massacre that took place, which maybe in some parallel universe, it wouldn't have been a massacre and might have been more of a revolution. There was hundreds of thousands of students that protested in various cities, not just Beijing, but other places. And so the government had a crackdown. They brought the armed forces in and cracked down on the students, and many of them, many died, and others were scattered and or jailed. So you have like one response to what the Soviet Union was breaking apart, and it could have been more of a militaristic crackdown, but instead was more of a revolution and an opening of countries emerging in a new way, and then with more sort of values of equal rights and freedom, and like, hey, we get our voice too, not just the government. And then China had the opposite situation happen. So I believe that there's something in that regard to 1989 that is also communicating it to us in 2025 to 2026. So it's something that bears watching. Again, probably take a deeper dive into that at a later time. And then at each of these points, there is a new like turning around that. So 1998 to 1999, we saw sort of this, the beginnings of like the height of like some of the fruition of the freedom of speech, of the internet was really starting to become a major worldwide force around the late 90s, and the dot-com boom was taking place in a big way at that time. We saw that in the Saturn Neptune opposition, we saw like this, a great the kind of the beginning stages of some of the early signs of where the recession could start to come in, which officially happened in 2008. But in 2007, there were some financial and economic indicators at that time where we're showing like, hey, this is not gonna look good. But they tried to kind of cover up everything, looking fine, where it was more of an illusion and it wasn't fine, and the housing and banking situation was far from fine after that. And then we get to the waning Saturn Neptune square, and we saw it here in the US. That was just before Trump had his first term, so he got elected just after that last square of Saturn Neptune. And so here, the 2024 to 2026 period, we saw, of course, Trump getting reelected to his skip the term after Biden, and getting back into power again here. So there's something about that and paradigms and some ending and new ones beginning. So there's more of this turnover that's happening with this Saturn and Neptune when they get together. Again, the transmission from both Saturn into Neptune and Neptune into Saturn as we go forward there. But one of the major, if we were to look at a major like uh situation where if we're like boiling it down like on a personal level but also on a global level, what are the two major things that can happen here? um this is something that really got me clued in when I read Richard Tarnas's or reread Richard Tarnas's Cosmos and Psyche. And there's a section in there about Saturn and Neptune. And it really kind of boils down to this one side, you can have a loss of faith and a disillusionment, which we've definitely have seen over the last year, if not longer. So we're going to see more of that energy here. But on the flip side, there's also with that comes a reawakening of hope and a discovery of spiritual resources and inner faith. And I don't just mean like religion. Certainly religion can be a part of it, but it's more about the deeper faith and hope within ourselves and in our human family. Like I see I have conversations with people that have sometimes really super dark and negative like expressions of like where humanity is going, and that everything's against us, and that it's almost painting a picture as if we can't make any decisions and we're just stuck. But I certainly don't subscribe to that particular um expression and their belief. I think that there is definitely something much more, the world that we can create. uh and Saturn and Neptune, I feel like, is a pathway uh, for us to create something totally new. And I think that the seeds of all of that are contained within us already. And it's just that when these planets come together, it can help kind of crack those seeds open and help us understand what that really is. So again, looking at this from the hard aspects of Saturn and Neptune conjunctions. So I'm going to elaborate a little bit here and just share here. I mentioned, so Saturn and Neptune are within 1 degree of each other between June 9th and August 23rd, 2025. So the June, July, August, that's a really powerful time for Saturn and Neptune. And of course, powerful ramifications for civilization. Um, so one way that this can manifest is through the judgment, structural, systemic building of the spiritual, heart-centered expression of Neptune. But it's also can exemplify the contest between religious doctrine versus a secularism way of living in the personal realm, as well as like in the government and economic, social, health, and educational systems. So you have a lot of that going on. And then carried over from Saturn, Neptune's journey through Pisces is the continuing assessment and legality of the use of hallucinogenic substances and drugs. Like here in Oregon, where I live, we quite a few years ago, we decriminalized a lot of different drugs. And then over the last year, they kind of redid it, and a different, like a compromise where they criminalized some of them again, but they did it to a lesser amount with a program imbued in that where they're sort of like have the option to go through a lot of rehab to get out of drugs, because it's been such a you know challenge for especially like meth and what was there was this other one, a couple other really bad ones that I off the top of my head can't remember. But all of that, like, what are we doing with all of that? And marijuana would be one of those things where we've come a long way legalizing that, and it's mostly countrywide. Most of it is medical, but then there's quite a number of states that have it legal and recreationally. Like, where is that taking us? And then the question of psilocybin and others, like, what are we going to do with this as a more of a medicinal type of energy, and how can it help us as far as our our spiritual and our psychological health, and what does that look like? So we're kind of experimenting with this, and so the Saturn Neptune is like, well, what are the regulations around this? How can we bring that into form and work with it on a conscious and healthy level? So the other part is, along with the drugs, is also this sort of this escapism that can come from this. It's like going the opposite way, and where you've got this, we're in this new paradigm of like where video games have like really just powerfully shaped, also partially shaped society too. And some people can become addicted to that, just like they could with gambling or other things like drugs. And so it's a form of escapism, even just, binging a lot on all this entertainment, which is like we're in this now mecca of entertainment, much more so than we've ever been. So I think that there's some Saturn and Neptune are going to be playing a role in how that shows up in our lives. And then we have Saturn and Jupiter. So just as Saturn and Neptune are conjuncting each other, 2025 and 2026, we have this 1/4 turn from 2020 uh, period into 2024 to 2025. And there's one last square that's happening in 2025, and that's on June 15th at 118 Cancer in Aries. That's when Jupiter moves into Cancer and Saturn in Aries. And this is going to help us understand what is going to be, what issues and things that we're going to have to really work on when we get to the Saturn Jupiter oppositions of 2029 to 2031. There's actually 6 of them in about a 2+ year period there. So, which happens in both Taurus, Scorpio, as well as Gemini, Sagittarius. So that's again a whole new thing there. There's a great article. I'll have to reference that after this. That I'm gonna send I think a link to everyone here that they can, if they want to download that, called the Elemental Wave, and it has to do with Saturn and Jupiter and kind of following their longer cycles, as well as like the shorter ones, like where they're just from conjunction to square to conjunction, or so to opposition to square, and then back to conjunction again. All of those have like a lot of powerful ramifications for humanity. And it's also one that the ancient peoples have looked at really, really closely. And anytime they saw Saturn and Jupiter conjunct, it was the start of a new era. It was the beginning of something new. So we're moving now into this one with here, uh, they were conjunct in Aquarius back in December of 2020, and they spent time near each other in the sign of Capricorn. So transitioning from that earth energy into the air energy. So that's part of sort of the message that's coming across here. And what is this turning point? So this, if we can include Neptune in this, because when Jupiter and Saturn have their square, Neptune is only about a degree away from Saturn at that time, and squaring Jupiter as well. So these opening squares, the themes in these signs, and this is including the 2 that happened in 2024, one in August of 2024, and the other just on Christmas Eve here, December 24th, 2024. Illusions of idealisms and new technologies, confusion and polarization of the structure and systems we surround ourselves with, which we can easily see around us, a greater tension and stresses around what we believe as opposed to what our current reality is as well. In shamanic astrology system, Saturn and Jupiter are middle world or terrestrial world planets. They have to do with the form and function and ambitions and goals and all the complexities that we have to work with in our real life. Neptune, on the other hand, has nothing to do with any of that. It's more about, working into like in the ethereal realm, having spiritual oneness with it all. So it doesn't really matter. Time doesn't matter for Neptune, but in Jupiter and Saturn's case, it really does. The other thing is more expansion of entertainment and creative processes. That's one of the interesting side effects, especially with not just around Saturn and Jupiter, but the Pisces element. It's again, you can equate some of this, what we see on the screen, with, streaming shows and all these other, YouTube and everything, and online. This is something that kind of exists in this invisible rays, in these with the microwaves and other transmissions that were connecting, and fiber optic cables and so forth. It's like there's energy transiting between these two things. And so Neptune is like making, almost like, and Saturn is helping, making the make believe into something that is actually concrete, that we can actually visually see. But also it can still also be an escape hatch into other realities as well, into realities beyond the tangible. So there's like a two-way stream of that, but it can expand all of this. And so that uh, Saturn Jupiter squares, when Jupiter was in Gemini and Saturn in Pisces, there wasn't really anything in those archetypes that really showed where, you really are. There's not really a kind of a purpose. It's more of a loose creative effort that just wants to create, and maybe in Gemini's case have a bit of a little bit of a narrative through its communication. In Pisces' case, it's like a, escape into this other reality in the fantasy world, and it can also sometimes, with these technologies, help be able to bring the human closer to the oneness of the universe. So, and then I mentioned here another bullet point about the regulations and laws and rules and restrictions, working with drugs, but also in, like, what are we going to do with all of them? What is the purpose? And I think part of that Neptune Saturn energy, along with Jupiter, is going to help us figure that out. But I don't feel it's going to be fully resolved until we get beyond Saturn and Jupiter. All right, so that June 15th date, which is the last of the waxing and or opening squares. So you can see here Saturn and Neptune right up here within about a degree of each other, 1 to 2 degrees of Aries. And then you see Jupiter here at 118 Cancer. So Neptune's got quite a bit to say, I feel, in this last square, which really highlights, I mean, there's a lot that goes on in June. Jupiter moves into Cancer in June. There's this square in June, and this happens right in the middle of the month, like smack dab in the middle of the month. So we have, this would be 7:35 Pacific time and 10:35 Eastern time. So we have it like sitting right there in the middle of the month, which really kind of, you might want to, we can even say it kind of takes ownership of the month, that this Saturn Jupiter / Neptune square brings about for humanity. All right, and then the last part of this is Uranus. So as you can see, this would be one of the themes of 2025 as well. Like I would say that certainly in the top three. The other one has to do with the alignments in the winter and early spring period with Aries and Pisces. And then lastly, the Eris Chiron thing. So Uranus in Gemini, 4 months it's in Gemini. Uranus is all about breakthroughs, unpredictability, throwing chaos into the mix for us to have a different kind of perspective. I mean, if we were able to look at like what equates to the Tower card in Tarot, some people say more Uranus, some people say more Pluto. It could even be a combination of the two, because the Tower is really whatever old paradigm, whatever old system was there, it's being blown apart, and something new wants to come through. And so in this case, in Uranus's case, something else wants to come through here. And so Uranus at the end of January will station direct at 2315 Taurus. And so after that point, it's going to go all the way until it reaches 1.5 degrees Gemini on September 5th of 2025. So this year is the last year that Uranus will station direct in, the second to last year. 2026 will be the last year it will station direct in Taurus. So we're nearing the end of this period. where the Taurus Uranus Taurus age, if you will, is finishing up here. And so Gemini has a lot to do with communications, a lot to do with connections in, and to some degree community, but a lot to do with information and how are we working with the information and the mind. So there's this potential. We're in this great information age, but information, is just information. It's in what we do with the information that turns it into perhaps knowledge and ultimately potentially wisdom as well. So Gemini tends to be in this sort of this uh, crossroads between information and knowledge in that zone, with like a little sprinkles of wisdom in there. And how do we work with that? But Gemini works with it in unpredictable and odd ways. It's the trickster archetype. It's the Hyoka or the coyote of shamanic or sort of Native American lore. It's the jester and fool from like the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. So it's the storyteller, the bard, the minstrel, the entertainer, and it tells stories. And maybe we have some breakthroughs creatively, I feel, with Uranus moving into Gemini. But of course, there's another side to this. And with all that information out there and sort of the buzz that's happening and unpredictability, is that the last two times that this happened here in the United States, we've been at war. So we were born with Uranus in, I think it was, let's look at here, 8 degrees, 55 minutes. So Uranus was at that degree. Uranus will not reach that degree until 2027. But I do feel we're going to get some additional indicators that if we are going to go to war or if not, we have a choice. We don't necessarily, doesn't dictate to us. It says, oh, well, Uranus is going into Gemini, so it means automatically that we're going to war. And I know other astrologers who look at that and they would make that prediction. I wouldn't necessarily make that prediction and look at it in that fashion. I would say that there's certainly an opportunity. There's a chance that we could certainly, you can look around you and you see the precursors to a potential world war, particularly what's happening in Ukraine and the Middle East and other parts of Africa and other places. So there's that potential there. But I don't think it'll look like, if we do go to war, I don't think it'll look like the kinds of wars we've fought, in the past. I think it could look much different, certainly with cyber warfare being more on the front lines of that. So just something to keep in mind. There's the potential that this could go in an entirely different direction, because Uranus in Gemini also wants freedom. It wants a new state of like to break the chains out, to this sense of like, I've got the knowledge, I've got the freedom, and I can utilize my imagination in any way we want, and we could tell whole new stories. So it can help us end an older paradigm along with Saturn and Neptune, and perhaps even break through to create sort of help us understand and create maybe a fertile ground for something new to come from that old paradigm that's wanting to complete itself. Now, the U.S. has other cycles that are going on. In fact, even this year, 2024 and 2025, Uranus was squaring the moon, the natal moon of the United States in Aquarius. So we're already having a lot of especially things that do with our origin story, our family of origin, kind of what we call the parental energy of the country itself. There's been this breaking apart of that. And that I feel like will continue with the Iranian energy moving into Gemini and starting even something fresh and new beyond that. So let's go back to this. So there's a cool book. It's relatively short, written by Nick Dagan Best. It's about Uranus. I think he calls it Uranus SA, because it's like, if you work with the word Uranus, he's got US and then A at the end. So it's like a emergence of Uranus and the USA. And he talks about the previous, the Revolutionary War when the U.S. was born, but also the previous two returns of Uranus. And he highlights in there that when we had our first return, at the end of that, we became um, more of a unified country after the Civil War ended. Not to say that it was still wasn't a lot of fractures and healing that needed to be done, because there certainly was, and we still have a lot of unresolved things happening now, for sure, even going back that far. And then after the second return, we became a global superpower. So what will happen and during World War II? So what will happen at the end of the third turn? So that's the question, and what we all are needing to look at here for ourselves. Um, and so the summary of this, I feel for 2025 is the breaking down of illusions when dreams meet pragmatism. It's also an underworld of ideologies. I want to comment on that because I didn't really talk about Pluto in Aquarius. Um, it's playing a significant role in 2025 as well. Um, it probably deserves really another video just to talk about that, and how, the US during Pluto and Aquarius forged its own constitution. We had our first presidential election. The French Revolution took place, and there was a revolution in Belgium as well, and there was these stirrings of like equal rights, and like what does it mean to be human, and going beyond just this class and caste type of energy. And so there was the stirrings of that with the Pluto and Aquarius energy coming through. So that underworld of ideologies, what we were originally founded on, not just in this country, but around the world, humanity and humanitarianism and all of that is really also coming in online for us. Manifestations of interconnectedness from both the celestial and the middle world. And then I mentioned is war on the horizon, and then there's the possibility that there could be. And then we have a next generation of tech revolution nearing, I feel, particularly in communications technologies, with all that Gemini energy, and then the sort of the ethereal energy of Pisces, but then also in energy revolution with generating energy, generating power, generating electricity. I think that 2025 is going to be pivotal for that as we go into the future years. And then there's the potential for it to be both volatile and hopeful, that it isn't, even though we're at the end of the Kali Yuga, which is the end of the dark age of humanity, we're still kind of on the bottom of the pendulum. And so after 2025, we start to kind of gradually go beyond that, and it can take centuries to do that. And so we still have a lot of growing pains to encounter. And then, yes, I do feel that this is the precursor to the dawning of a new era for humanity. And so we're close by. We have something coming up here pretty soon. And so that's all I've got. This is my website, and this is how you can contact me. I am a professional astrologer. I do readings for a living, and I do YouTube videos, and I go to fairs, and I travel, and I'm actually going to be coming to Ohio in April. And there's depending on the weather, we can try to gather and do a little night sky gathering while I'm out there too. So I'm excited about that. Um, yeah, so all right. So Deborah, if we want to open this up more to questions, let's do that.
That sounds good. Does anyone have any questions? I have a chart I want to look at if nobody comes up with questions.
Okay. Oh, Deborah,
Yeah,
I was just curious, that Zoom bomber, are we going to be able to edit that out?
I will edit it out, and I have reported them for hamming and for disruptive vulgar behavior.
Sweet. Thank
Yes.
you. All right. All right. So, yeah, lots of information. So much information. So, yeah, and you'll be able to watch this at a later time. And you know, I encourage everybody to play it back and take notes and develop thoughts and questions that you can ask Deborah or myself. be happy to answer more. So I guess we can look at that chart.